Welcome to this webinar on CRISC. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Saj Rai, and I have more than 20 years of experience in the industry, out of which 13 years have been as in a senior management position, including CTOs and VP IT, etc. And also have had the opportunity to conduct several trainings over the last 10 years. I've conducted more than 600 all training sessions. And here are some of the certifications which I have: CISSP, PCSP, CISM, CISA, CGIT, CRISC, etc. Yeah, that's my brief introduction. And today we will talk about CRISC. To understand CRISC, let's quickly talk about ISACA. ISACA is the parent body which is behind this particular certification course. And ISACA as an organization has been around for a long time, almost 40, 50 years now. And ISACA has many other courses, including CISA, CRISC, CISM, CGIT, COVID, etc., which most of these courses is available, and I teach many of these courses. Anyway, so today our focus is on CRISC. So over the 1 hour, I just wanted to quickly introduce you to the course. I want you to understand what is expected out of this course. All right, so let's get started. CRISC, which is the Certified in Risk Information Systems Control. Yeah, so this exam is designed to really test your knowledge on a wide variety of topics related to the risk management and information systems control. The exam focuses on business and IT risk management in an enterprise infrastructure, as well as how to design and implement IT security controls and how to mitigate risk. Okay, so this is one of the newer courses added to the ISACA. The CISA has been around for more than 40 years. CRISC has been around for a little more over a decade now. And it is also accredited under the ANSI ISO IEC 17024/12, which means this is a very well regarded course around the world. And there are so far about 26,000 odd professionals who are certified on CRISC. Okay, so the question is then, what are the things that we need to study here? What are the topics? Well, we have domains. There are actually 4 domains, which is considered to be part of the job practice area. The first one is the IT risk identification, okay, which holds about 27%. The second is IT risk assessment, about 28%. Domain 3 is risk response mitigation, 23%. And the fourth one is risk and control monitoring and reporting, 22%. As you can see here, these are various phases of the risk management process, where you start with identifying the risk, then you assess the risk, then you respond to those risks, and then you monitor and report those risks. So that's how the domains are also divided here. And I encourage you not to look at the numbers, the weightage, because you have to understand and learn all the domains if you intend to pass in the exam. Okay, so so I want to take you through each of these domains very briefly today, just to give you an idea of some of the important topics, okay, just to get you started. And then, of course, you are most welcome to explore this, and I will discuss how to go about this a little further down. So the process of getting certified is that you have to register for the exam. After you're ready, you take a register for the exam, you pay the fees, you pass the exam. Now, only passing the exam is not enough. You still have to provide some documentation. Just basically some kind of proof that you have some experience. So once you provide that, then you would be certified, CRISC certified. And well, once you're certified, then you have to still further maintain your certification, which includes, well, earning CPEs, which are your continuing professional education points. There are lots of activities you could do to earn these points. I'll talk about that later on. And we also have to pay an annual maintenance fee, which is not a big amount. Some amount you could pay that, around $40, $50. And if you have both these things, well, after 3 years, then you're automatically recertified. You do not have to take the exam again. Okay. So also there's a possibility of you losing the certification, and that can happen if you, well, do not earn the CPEs, or you do not pay the maintenance fees, or you violate certain ethical standards. So these are the 3 reasons you could lose your certification. Otherwise, this is for you to keep. Okay, so that's the basic process. I'm not going too much into detail for now. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them at the end. All right, so the experience required, you need to have 3 or 4 more years of experience in IT risk management and IS control, and there are no waivers or substitutions for this. The exam is 150 multiple choice questions, out of which only one is correct option. Usually there are 4 options and one of them is correct. And the duration is for 240 minutes. That's 4 hours. Passing score is on a scale of 200 to 800. You got to score about 450. And the exam fees is for ISACA member is $575. And if you're non-member, then $760 US dollars. And I do highly encourage you to become a member because there are several benefits on becoming a member, including obviously the exam fee, which is much cheaper when you become an ISACA member. Anyway, that's something which you can discuss and we can decide later on. But let's talk about how you're going to prepare for the exam. So, well, the first thing is to be familiar with the CRISC job practice areas, and that's briefly we'll talk about today. We're not going to get into too much into detail. And you can also self-assess yourself. There are materials which you can learn, and well, it requires you to do an iterative study because there's a lot of things that you need to learn, and you have to go back and study. Avoid cramming. Okay, so that's a good way to learn. And certainly, I have had a lot of people trying to cram these kind of exams and failing the exam. So it's important that you understand the concepts, because once you understand the concept, you will be able to answer any question. Okay, because many of the questions will not be there in the dumps. So you'll have to understand the question. That's the only way you can pass the exam, right? So there's no way to cram and pass these kind of exams. And find a study group. That's another option. Okay, so we do have study groups. If anybody's interested, you can always go. Okay, so again, to kind of understand this, there are a lot of basic concepts that you need to understand. Concepts of the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, concepts of different kind of controls, including physical controls, technical controls, administrative controls, and the process of identification, authentication, authorization, non-repudiation. Okay, you need to understand data sensitivity, basis which you can protect and classify your data, classify and protect the data. So all of these are basic concepts that you obviously need to understand. Okay, so I'm not going to get into these details for this webinar, but yes, as part of the course, you'll have to learn these concepts. Yeah, so question is, if you're studying about risk management, so what does risk mean? Now, there are various different definitions of risk here. I'm going to read a few of them here. One is from the PMBOK, which is typically talks about a risk from the project management point of view. It says a risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's objective. Okay, that's an interesting one because a risk can be a positive risk, and while it's not always negative. Okay, so give an example. Last year when you had this work from home, and a lot of people started going online and started using tools like Zoom. Now, there was a risk for Zoom that it will not be able to provide the kind of level of services that is expected because of the number of growth of users. Now, that's a positive risk because that's a happy risk to be in. Okay, so those kind of risks are always sometimes welcome. Anyways, there's another definition from ISO 31000. It says a risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and an effect is a positive or negative deviation from what is expected, right? So again, you can see the usage of the positiveness also here. ISACA is risk is generally defined as the combination of the probability of an event and its consequence. And IC square also has very similar. It says the possibility of damage or harm and the likelihood that damage or harm will be realized. So very similar definitions. You need to understand what it actually means. And yeah, so you do not have to memorize any of these, but you need to understand what the risk means, okay? So, well, as I said, we're going to look into 4 different aspects of risk management life cycle. We start off with identifying the risk, then we get into the IT risk assessment, Then we talk about how you're going to respond to those. Once you assess, you understand what the risk is. How do we assess that? How do you respond to that? And what are the ways to respond? And then once we have some mitigation, some controls in place, it's important to continuously monitor those risk controls. So we'll talk about briefly about those things. First, let's focus on the identification part. Okay. So we kind of begin by the process of identifying the assets. Okay. Assets could be your hardware, could be a software, could be any other things which are important to the organization. We'll talk about that in why. Identify the different kind of threats to those assets, identifying if there are any existing controls which are protecting those assets, identify the vulnerabilities, which are the weaknesses, identify the consequences, and then you understand what the risks are, and then you figure out a way to handle the risk. Okay, so that's the identification process. So if you have to understand some of these risk terminologies. Okay, so when I say asset, well, asset are your valuable resources that you're trying to protect. Could be your data, could be some PII, your intellectual properties, etc. A vulnerability is a weakness. Okay, it's a weakness. It's a flaw. It's a loophole in the system. Well, a threat is an event which will exploit the vulnerability. Okay, and usually resulting in some kind of a loss. And well, that would be the risk. Okay, some kind of a negative action, some kind of loss for the organization. And then the impact also matters. The severity of the damage matters, how much risk is. So if the impact is high, generally the risk also is high. If the impact is low, then the risk also, the level of risk also goes down. Okay, so just be aware of these terminologies. Now, you have to be absolutely clear about the differences between a threat and a risk. Not too many people are very clear about it. Okay, what's a vulnerability? What's a risk? So, for example, let me quickly ask you. Suppose you're driving down the road, going to a very important meeting. Okay, and so you're getting late for the meeting, so you're on top speed, and unfortunately there is a faulty engine. Okay, a car engine has some fault, right? So based on that scenario, what could be the threat? So that's a threat. There can be a breakdown, there could be an accident. Now the question is, what is the risk? If there's an accident, what is the risk? If there's a car breakdown, what's the risk? Right. So, well, you could probably you'll miss out on that meeting, that important meeting that you're rushing to. So you probably not be able to reach there on time. Okay. Another possibility, and which is quite a unfortunate one, is well, if the impact is high, it could lead to loss of life. Accident could lead to loss of life or very serious injury. If it is not a major impact, then it could lead to lower the scratches, minor injury, and so on. Okay, so that's the risk part. It also depends on the level of risk depends on the impact. So there are a few more topics like threat agent, etc., which you probably will have to learn about. Anyway, so basic understanding. This is an interesting one. I like this generic risk model. I'll just put it across and for you to understand. So assets, your valuable assets are endangered by threat agents like hackers or earthquakes, etc. And they initiate a threat. Threat is like a hacking into the server by exploiting the vulnerability. Maybe there's a weak rule in the firewall, which results in an exposure of some data, which causes an impact. Okay? If you lose all the data, there's a high impact, which produces a risk for the organization, loss of money, loss of reputation, loss of regulatory issues out there. Now, to reduce that risk, we can mitigate by using some kind of countermeasures or safeguards, which is designed to protect your assets. Okay, so I like this risk model. You can probably make a note of this if you're interested. So I hope you understood the various different the terminologies used here. Anyways, yeah, so this is the first part. There are many things here, but overall, those are the things that you do to identify your risk. Then we get into the risk assessment. So we talk about various things here, but one of the things we do is analyze the risk. And there are two ways to do so: quantitative and qualitative. Now, quantitative relates to quantity, relates to numbers, relates to calculations and values and so on. Now, there are some formulas that you need to learn about quantitative risk analysis, okay, like single loss expectancy, or how much you're going to lose if a particular threat occurred one time or in a single year, etc. So there are certain formulas which you have to understand. But so having a quantitative is usually gives you that cost benefit analysis, and sometimes very useful to take decisions. You know exactly how much are you going to gain or lose, and you can take decisions based on that. Okay, but performing a quantitative risk analysis is not always an option, because this can be time consuming and could be very costly, and you need people who can perform these kind of complex calculations. So qualitative risk is sometimes a better option. Qualitative is very subjective, and it could just look at certain parameters based on judgment or guesswork or past experience, etc., which is very subjective. Quantitative, on the other hand, is very objective. But like I said, qualitative sometimes do the job as well. So this is an example of a risk matrix you can see here. So you could use something like this, a matrix which is based on two factors: likelihood. Sometimes you hear the word probability or frequency or whatever, and the impact. Impact here, well, it can also mean damage or the consequence, etc. It all means the same thing in this context. Now, if you see here, the likelihood from very unlikely to very likely, and the impact negligible to very severe. Okay, for example, if you're living in a coastal region, and the likelihood of a tsunami could be very high. If it does occur, tsunami, then the damage could be quite severe. So that ways the rating level could be 25. Okay, and similarly, in a desert could be quite very unlikely. And if it does happen, the impact will be very negligible. So maybe a rating of 1 or 2, whatever the case may be. So you don't really have to worry about those risks. So you identify which are your significant or severe risks, high risk rather, and then you address them accordingly. Okay. So this is a very fairly simple way to perform those kind of assessment. Again, I'm not going into too much into detail. This is tool that is used, risk metrics. And well, the next part is to be able to respond. So in the IT assessment, you try to understand, yeah. So we try to understand what what type of risk it is, and so we assess the value of the risk, so we are in a position to now take a decision what to do with that risk. Okay, so is that risk more than our acceptable level, or is it less? What should we do about risk? And that depends on the response we have for that risk. And well, there are 4 different responses. Well, we can transfer the risk or share that risk with somebody else. That typically happens when you outsource it to some other third party. Or a really good example is insurance. Okay, we transfer that risk to another party in that case. Next option is to avoid the risk, right? So if you feel that the risk of going to the cloud is too high, you say, okay, forget about going to the cloud right now. Let's keep our servers on premise. So you can do that, avoid taking that action. Okay. Or you could mitigate that risk. You're saying, okay, let's go to the cloud, but let's keep it make it private cloud so that we mitigate that risk of exposure. So you kind of use that private cloud in that case, or you could also have the option of accepting the risk when you feel that the risk is within the acceptable criteria. You feel that the risk is not very high, then in that case you can accept the risk and move on with your life. So these are the 4 different options you have. Okay. There is a 5th one as well, which is risk rejection, and that is something one should not do. In the case of rejection, is where you obviously reject the risk, so you ignore that. That is considered to be bad management. So you don't do those things. We only do all of the 4 options that you see here, where you act judiciously. You do actions depending on the risk here. So any of these 4 options is absolutely legit, and you must perform these options only. So that's how you respond to risks, without going into too much into detail. Okay. Then once you have responded to the risk, it's now important to monitor, and this is where it comes to the 4th domain: risk and control monitoring and reporting. And so how do you No, or rather, the question is, why do we have to keep on, monitoring the risk once you have put in those controls in place, countermeasures in place? Then why do we have to keep on monitoring? Well, the answer is because the risk environments could keep on changing. Okay, so today you put in some kind of a control. It doesn't necessarily mean that that control is going to work as expected. You got to keep on reviewing that, assessing it. Assessing the controls is very important to know that, well, things are working out, there are no issues with those controls. And there's a whole lot of things you can do here. We kind of look into some metrics. Some of the metrics we consider is the KPI and the KRI. Well, KPI is, which is a key performance indicator, indicates how well something is being done. Okay, so you measure that. There are different KPIs. For a project, the typical KPIs that we use is the scope, the budget, the timelines, the quality, etc. Okay, so these are the major KPIs that we use to understand how the project is performing. If there's a change in the scope, it's quite likely that would result in changing your timelines or your budget. Okay, and you'll probably find that, and you want to kind of monitor those KPIs. And we have a KRI, key risk indicator. A KRI is, again, part of your risk matrix where you want to understand how risky a particular activity is. Okay, so every activity would have some kind of a KRI. If it's got a high value for KRI, you understand that this activity would have a future adverse effect. So you probably kind of have a monitoring on these activities, and if something gets triggered, you get to know about it, and so you can take actions on those particular activities. So KRI, when you set up a KRI, it could be anything. It could be numbers, it could be anything else. For example, it could be a rating between 1 to 5, okay, 5 being the highest, and you kind of understand these activities would have a future adverse effect. So you kind of have controls and monitoring in place to understand that if something goes wrong, you will be immediately triggered about it, so you can probably take actions immediately. Okay, so that's the KRI that you'll have to understand. Okay, so again, there are many things into it. I'm not going to get into much into detail for now. So this is something which you need to understand again as part of the course. And there are a few other things we'll have to understand. But these KPI and KRI are the main metrics that you use to kind of measure and monitor your risks. And you want these KRI, KPIs to be smart. Okay, so smart means, well, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, right? So these are the smart, I suppose you know it, but you need to remember these things. Okay, they might ask in the exam again. So SMART, remember the acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Yeah, so that's the end of this particular webinar as well. It was just a very, very, very brief introduction to the course itself. It's a very interesting course. Now, some of you might wonder, okay, who should be taking this? Should I be taking this? I'm not a risk practitioner. Do I need to take this course? Now, what I feel is risk is something that everybody has to, in some position, you have to manage and handle risk. Okay, you could be a project manager, or you could be, everybody actually does deliver some kind of project at some point of time. You could be an IT manager. The role really doesn't matter. You'll have risk every day in the organization or in the projects that you do. And so being able to understand and handle and manage these risks, I think this will really give you that, the knowledge to be able to do so. Okay. So anyway, so if you just to quickly let you know, well, this webinar is going to be available, and we'll put it on YouTube, and we'll try to share it on email as well. Okay, and we do have a series session coming up. So if anybody's interested to, go down the journey with me, I would be happy to have you on that session. All right. So thank you so much for attending the webinar.